relevant, reliable, and researched. This is Experts on Call, the show focused on delivering leading-edge news and information on today's most beneficial products and services. This is Experts on Call on AM 650.
Return the sender. Return the sender. I gave a letter to the post.
Yes, this is Key Pacific's Talk About Strata. I'm Sterling Fox. My co-host is Tony Gioventu from the Condominium Homeowners Association of BC, where he is its executive director. He's also, of course, the condo columnist in the Vancouver province. And is it 24 hours or Metro, Tony?
24 hours on Thursdays.
On Thursdays and all over the province, once a week anyway. Yeah. Art Factora, our producer, jumped in with a little Elvis New Year music there. Tony usually chooses the tunes here, but you let Art have a go at it this time.
Actually, kind of an interesting choice, especially the announcement after Canada Post.
Yes.
Over time, slowly eliminating home delivery and having boxes, which, for the most case, isn't going to affect Strata corporations at all because they all have mailbox delivery as it is now.
That's true,
right?
exactly.
Most of them have mail rooms or an isolated central mail center.
Absolutely.
Townhouses, bare lands, so when it comes to pretty much half of our population in the province with multifamily, it's probably not going to affect them anyhow.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do have our mailbag open for this first show of 2014, so I suppose it was kind of appropriate there. This next question comes from Michael for you, Tony. Another short and to-the-point question. Where do we file our depreciation reports?
It's a great question because I've lost track of how many times I've heard that this fall. Nowhere. No one files these reports. There are no strata police. It's self-regulating legislation. And the Strata Corporation simply obtains the report and retains it on record on their files.
Oh.
Right?
So you don't have to send a copy to Victoria? And,
no.
See, I would have assumed that whatever ministry is responsible for overseeing the Strata Act would be the collecting point for all of this paperwork.
It's not. There is no oversight on this legislation. It's not enforced by anyone. So it's self-regulating legislation. It does open the door, though, on another question that comes up with respects to where do we ask for this information from, or how do we give formal notice to the Strata Corporation? And this is a filing requirement. At the Land Title Registry, Strata Corporations are obliged to file their mailing address.
Okay.
So to receive official notice, court notice, notice of invoice billing, documents, stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
What's interesting is we had another number of Strata corporations last year miss deadlines on issues because they had never updated their mailing addresses that were filed in land titles. Many of them don't file addresses in land titles. So if there's no address filed in land titles, then the service goes to probably each of the strata lots in the hope that you're going to snag somebody that's paying attention. But in the absence of an address filed, it's ambiguous. And what if you have the wrong address filed? You had a property manager from 2 years ago. They were your agent. They filed the address as their office, as they do. They are the official address for that purpose.
Yes.
But you've terminated the agreement. You've gone to another company. No one changed the address.
Right.
There's notice of a requirement. A letter gets sent to that address for the purpose of a hardship exemption from bylaws, or there's notice of a court application or notice of a deadline for something. You don't get it, right? So it's the beginning of the year. Good thing to check up on. What is your official address filed in land titles?
Interesting stuff. Michael, thank you for your email. This one is from Mindy, somewhere in Metro Vancouver, who says, "Hi there. I own a condo in a strata building. I hear my neighbors in the unit above me walking, and so I requested they provide a certificate or something to prove they have the proper underlay. So the strata had the underlay tested, and apparently it's not quite up to code, but may well have been code at the time of its installation. So do you have any idea what the standards are for underlay, and if they've changed within the last 2 years? And," Mindy adds, "what are my rights as an owner living below the noisy people upstairs with the thin underlay?" What about underlay, Tony, in terms of sound muting qualities? Are there standards?
There are, and it's interesting because BCIT actually has a course on this program on acoustics. I've just recently discovered. So we're going to do some work with them with respects to trying to understand the impact of sound transmission in buildings.
Okay.
But there are two issues. Well, there are actually three issues. The first issue is the type of construction. So is it poured concrete construction or is it wood frame construction?
My guess,
right?
and it's just based on this information, it's a wood frame building.
It's probably wood frame.
Right.
The second issue is what was the original type of flooring? Because the original flooring installed was installed as part of the acoustic design of the building. So if the acoustic design of the building was such that it required carpeting throughout the building so that you would meet the sound suppression, which I suspect is generally the case in most buildings,
Sure.
that becomes part of the acoustic design of the building.
And she says it may well have been code at the time of the installation. It may have been precisely designed for that.
Well, it may have been, and that may be fine, but the issue is people change flooring.
Sure.
And what we see is people change from carpeting to some sort of harder surface flooring. So it could be lino, could be engineered hardwood floors,
yep.
could be tile, could be cork, could be a variety of different floors. Just think of it this way. If you drop a marble on the face of a guitar, what do you get? You get quite a lot of sound. You get the resonance of the sound. Drop a marble on a piece of ceramic tile, the same thing occurs. Drop a marble on the carpet, and the carpet that was originally there absorbs most of the sound.
Yes.
Right? And so it's not only about the fact is, did the underlay meet the minimum standards? The underlay probably did, and it was probably the right underlay for what the original flooring was, which was probably carpet.
Right.
That underlay does not meet the same standards to reduce sound when you suddenly apply a hard surface floor, and that's one of the challenges. So, one of the difficulties with manufacturers or with, go to Home Depot or go to one of the flooring companies and they say, this is the best underlay you can buy. Well, it may be, but how much more noise are we producing because we've now put a hard surface floor in?
Right.
And that's the problem that we have, of course, is the building was never really designed for that purpose. Wood frame buildings, if you're in wood frame buildings, you're going to hear lots of sounds. You're going to hear people's toilets flush. You're going to hear when they have a shower and they're singing in the shower, which is not always great fun. You're going to hear other things that happen throughout the evening. You're going to hear doors opening and closing and kitchen cupboards opening and closing. And you hear the vacuum cleaner run and the washer and the dryer run and kids walking on the floor and pets trotting across the floor.
Nails
right,
on
exactly.
the hardwood, yeah.
All those things come with strata living.
Yes.
The question you have to ask yourself, what's reasonable? What's acceptable? Right?
And Mindy's question, in this case, with the older underlay in a wooden building, and we're inserting that factoid into the conversation ourselves, but she wants to know, what are my rights? What can I do about this? Because she still hears them probably pretty clearly.
Well, the minimal standards are not very good. Right? The reality is minimal standards for underlay with respects to hard surface flooring. If you're living in a wood frame building that doesn't have acoustic baffling between the floors, is really not that great. You're going to hear a lot of noise.
Okay.
So minimum standards are really, that's not what it's about. What it's about is, how do I get to use my strata lot with reasonable use and enjoyment without constantly being disrupted by what the activities upstairs are.
Right, and that's what she sees that as her rights as the owner of her unit to enjoy life at a reasonable level and not listen to this thumping around all the time. So what recourse, if any, does Mindy have?
Well, the bylaws say quiet use and enjoyment of your strata lot, common property and limited common property. So what does quiet use and enjoyment mean? I think it means that at 3 a.m. I should be able to sleep without being woken up by someone flushing their toilet upstairs, or without somebody walking across the floor and causing noise. I think you do have a right of you have this balance of reasonable rights of quiet versus there are going to be some noises in a building. There's always going to be a trade-off between the two.
And where does this come to a head, Tony? Would this be at a strata council meeting, or would Mindy be best advised to go upstairs and discuss the matter with the person who's making the noise that she's living underneath? Or do you go to the third party? Do you go to the strata council and go, guys, I got a problem here?
Well, if you have a comfortable enough relationship with the person upstairs, you would have that discussion. But that's not usually the case.
Right.
Especially if you've complained in the past. There's now probably some friction.
Yeah.
You don't want to put yourself into a situation where you have risks. So your first line of defense is your strata council. You request a hearing with council, send them a letter, say, look, we have an issue. The strata corporation may discover there's a problem.
Okay.
Right? They may have,
they said they had the underlay tested, so she obviously has approached the council already.
Well,
they went and took a look at this underlay and checked it out.
If they've had the underlay tested, this sounds to me like somebody's changed a floor. That doesn't sound like it's an original
okay.
floor. But older buildings, or what we'll see on buildings, is where we have in newer buildings, in wood frame buildings, we will have water lines and things like that within the floor assembly, and then they pour a skim coat of concrete over top of it within the wood frame building. That's a great idea until somebody's put hardwood flooring in and driven spikes into it, and then it all crumbles. And then you have all kinds of other problems with respects to noise and sound transmission and problems. It's never an easy answer. Best answer or best place to start, though, is with your strata council. What's a reasonable solution? Some strata corporations have actually had to look at their bylaws years later and say, you know what? A lot of people put hardwood floors in their units. There's a lot of noise problems. The noise echoes throughout the building. We now need a bylaw that says all traffic areas within strata lots must have carpeting area carpets on those areas.
Okay.
So there's other ways of dealing with the issue. So, and I hope for Mindy's sake that the person who's above her is not the president of Strata Council, because that's the worst case scenario for most people.
That's the proverbial brick wall, isn't it?
Well, it's going to be an uphill battle for sure.
Right. Mindy, thank you for your email. By the way, we're always reading emails. Tony gets a million of them every day at the Condominium Homeowners Association.
I don't know about a million, but it feels like that some days.
I'll bet it does, especially on Monday mornings, Tony. But our address, if you'd like to shoot us an email for inclusion into a future broadcast, we'd love to hear from you. It's radio@keypacific.com, and Key Pacific is QUAY Pacific.com. So radio@keypacific.com, and Tony and I will get copied on that right away and try to include it in an upcoming broadcast. There's still more of this one to come, but we first must take this quick timeout.
Delivering relevant and beneficial consumer information. This is Experts on Call, and there's more still ahead on AM 650.